Wait, where did I put my lucky rabbit's foot?
All right, so my name is Prudence. You can call me Prue. I run the Lucky Rabbits talk show, and we are super excited. We're really lucky to have a guest who's a prolific author, co-founder of the Tarosophy Tarot Association, a teacher. And before I go over all of that, I'll let him introduce himself.
Okay, so nice to meet you, Prue, and I am Marcus Katz. I'm based in the Lake District in England, and I guess I've been reading tarot since I was 13, so that now is 45 years, something like that.
Nice. That's awesome. That's like a very at that point it's ingrained in your blood at some point.
Yeah, Rachel Pollack stayed here. I'm sorry to name drop already, but quite a while ago, and she's now very sadly missed. But Rachel left me a message on the fridge with the fridge magnet letters that we had on the fridge at the time, and it was the tarot is the blood. And I think it is really ingrained. I tend to see, read, and hear tarot in just about everything these days.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. Does everything kind of pop up like you almost think in terms of tarot cards at this point?
I certainly think in a Kabbalistic way, and whenever I'm reading Waite or Crowley or anyone who was based in the esoteric tradition, I can't help but, particularly when you notice that they have 10 sentences in a page and so forth, and then you go, oh yeah, there's the tree of life, because it was ingrained in them as well. And
Yes.
perhaps if we come to take a look at some of the cards and so forth, I can perhaps share how ingrained it was with Waite and with Pamela Coleman Smith and so forth, and we can perhaps take a look at that.
That's cool. Yes, absolutely. Before any of that, I do want to ask, so what does your practice look like these days? Are you doing private readings or mostly just teaching and contributing?
Sure. Everything, I think. And this year I'm looking forward, and this is the start of it, a lot of outreach, talking to other practitioners and so forth. I got back from the Philippines and Japan in November, and they had the second Philippines Tarot Con there with a great guy called Rob Rubin, and he's a force of nature, and they had 700 people.
That's
and
really impressive.
It
Actually.
was amazing. And some of the people there, the decks that they are creating, the work that they're doing, the presentations that they did just blew me away. It was gorgeous. And then I hopped back via Japan to the Tarot Tokyo Museum, and Moto-san, who organizes that, has a big history in tarot, and sort of himself came into finding himself running a tarot museum through his family and various other things. And he really has this appreciation of the aesthetic of tarot, the art of it, in a very Japanese sort of way, if I may stereotype it that way. But when we had some beautiful conversations and so forth, and it's just great to see what's going on in the world at the moment with tarot.
That is so interesting. I just had someone telling me that the Japanese culture has kind of moved towards really loving the iconography and like appreciating it in like an aesthetic kind of way. So that's really interesting to hear about. They have a museum.
Yes, in Tokyo, and he has a cafe as well nearby, and they run things at the cafe and they run presentations. And I gave I think I gave about 8 workshops in the Philippines, and one big presentation or 2 in Japan, and a load of things where just people would come up and we'd get the cards out and we'd just do a training session there and then as we were stood around.
That's awesome. So how does the language barrier work with that? Is it mostly just a lot of bilingual people there, or?
I was very lucky. They had a really good translator for me, and I got to speak with the translator of, we have I think 2 or 3 books of ours translated into Japanese, and I got to meet the translator as well. So he did a lot of the translation.
It's interesting too with tarot. A lot of it is that iconography and that imagery where you almost could do it without language, because so much of the reading is almost empathetic, right? You almost can like feel what your reader is like. Your reader will draw a card and they'll be like, oh, or they'll be like, ah, and that almost is languageless, which is kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, for sure. My co-author Tali Goodwin calls the tarot a blank Bible, that we all write our own significance and meaning into it. So for me, it has its symbology, it has its place within Kabbalah, within Western esotericism, with numerology and all of the other sets of correspondences. But most importantly, it's a map of people's lives. And I think we worked it out a while ago. There are something like 6.1 or 14.2 quintillion combinations of cards. With 10 cards in a Celtic cross, with 78 cards, without reversals, there are something like 6.1 quintillion layouts. And it is highly unlikely in your lifetime, my lifetime, anyone on the planet will ever reproduce the spread that you have in front of you.
But so often they will almost kind of pop up, not to cut you off, and that's kind of the spooky part, or the scientifically stimulating part, is that.
For sure. And that will tend towards some particular meaning, some message that needs to come through, because as Kirk has said, the universe is bound with invisible knots. And so a reading will tend to, for a person, for a client, for oneself as well, will constantly have a strange attractor to a particular thing that it wants to get through. But the incredible thing, of course, is anyone learning the tarot with very little learning to some extent, or with all the learning in the world, can lay out those 10 cards and read them.
Mm-hmm.
No matter which of the 6.1 or 14.2 quintillion combinations, a tarot card reader can look at that and go, oh, this means this means this. Yes. And that's mind-blowing, that language is so nuanced and complicated, and yet we can learn it, like you say, from the iconography, which is universal.
I've heard a lot of people say that some of the most interesting things to see is they'll give their children tarot cards, and their children almost have a quicker intuitive understanding of what they're meaning without going into every little detail. They'll really get the flavor of the card, or yeah, absolutely. There's like a universal, like, it's almost when you stop trying so hard, they'll start to come to you, because that meaning is really fluid, especially with the combinations.
Yeah, and I always say to students that the most important thing to do is remember we are tarot card readers. We're not counselors, we're not therapists, we're not advisors. We can be all of those things. We can be astrologers, we can be all sorts of things. We can be wise, we can be stupid, but we are tarot card readers. So if you get stuck, read the card, look at the card, and don't be afraid to say out loud, oh, on this card is a man holding scales and he's giving out money. And to reconnect to the card, particularly with students, I like to say, if you're giving example readings, like doing exercises, I have to be able to stand behind you at any point and stop you and say, where from the card have you got that?
Yeah.
And if you can't justify where from the card you've got that, even if it's intuition, then you are not a tarot card reader in that point. You are just giving some homespun advice, or some cliched advice, or maybe some stupid advice or wise advice, but it's got nothing to do with you being a tarot card reader. And I like to pull people always back down to the cards.
And there is that symbolism in every single one, right? I mean, you might be looking at a king card and there's cherubs on the seat, or there's like a salamander at his feet. And each of those little tiny pieces have like a piece of nuance towards it. But I do see what you're saying. If you start going off on on your own agenda almost. Like you
Yeah.
can easily slip into an egotistical reading where you're starting to read from what you want, like projecting on people. This is an interesting question. Do you kind of cut the client off when you're reading almost? Like you feel like until you're done reading the book in front of you, you don't even want to tap in?
Yeah, it varies, I think. Strangely enough, just today I've had 2 people ask me for year ahead readings.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally, for those, I shuffle. It's a 36 card layout that I do for that. And quite often I wait until the right time for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I lay out the cards, I take a photo of them, I put the cards away. And then sometimes it might be a couple of days before I actually sit down, pull the cards up on the screen, and then do the reading. And sometimes, because it's so fortune telling like, prophecy like, advisory for each month in a whole year, it's quite nerve-wracking, because in this case I don't have anything from the client. I might only have their email and their name, but
Right.
That's why I have to wait for the right moment for those invisible knots to sort of align for me and the cards to actually lay them out and to do the interpretation. In Tarosophy, we say the oracular moment is sacrosanct. That is, whatever you do in the moment is always right. Is
Yes.
always part of the oracle. Whether the cards fall out, whether you've got a missing card in the deck, whether you interrupt it and then do something else and then come back to it, that is sacrosanct. It's part of the oracular moment, and that's something special.
Yeah, absolutely. In that, how do you feel about like oracle decks? I think you helped co-author or helped co-create or maybe made your own, right? Some of them, or
Yes, yeah, we've done several decks, and we've brought, for example, the Lenormand deck back to popular attention. And we went down to the British Museum to find the original Game of Hope that became the Lenormand deck, because it's got nothing to do with Lenormand herself. And so we republished that. And that was a really weird story in itself, because that came from a footnote in a book about an academic, about another academic. And it was just this one footnote that got us thinking, oh, that's interesting. And we were looking for a particular deck, and then it took us all the way to the British Museum and back. But I think with oracle cards, I have slightly different ways of reading those, perhaps. And to go back to the question about including the other person, nowadays, in terms of where my practice is at, I very rarely do spreads. What I tend to do is I use a method, which is in my book Tarosophy, of gaining a metaphor from the client. So there are several different ways of approaching it, but we end up with an unconscious metaphor from the client. For example, a bull in a china shop, or a cliff edge that I'm holding on by a thin strand of hair, for example.
interesting.
And then I lay out the cards to represent the thin strand of hair and the cliff edge.
To find out kind of what those would be, or more information on those. So
Exactly.
you're pulling that from kind of your impression of them, or the story.
I use a technique that I stole from a method called clean language.
Yeah.
Clean language is a therapeutic method. It was developed by a guy called David Grove, I think. He was from New Zealand and passed away a while ago. But he had a counseling approach that was basically, and this is where it comes back to, do we include the client or not? His approach to therapeutic work was to try and work in such a way that you do not involve yourself in any way.
Yes.
And so there's a series of questions where you get the client to elicit their own metaphors. and you can lead them in the sense of, and when such and such, what then? So you only put in the when and what then and the linking words, and they use their metaphor. And sometimes you can be working in a really weird symbolic way. I ended up doing one exercise with somebody ages ago, and it was they did it with me, and I was using alchemical symbolism, and they were leading me through this set of questions. And at one point they said, and when, it was something like, and when triangle, where goes crucible? And I just looked at them and my head exploded internally. And I don't know what was going on unconsciously, but my unconscious did. And because we use symbolism naturally, even our words are symbols, even our internal representation of the world is symbolic, then we can elicit a symbol from the client for their situation and then use the card symbolically. And it's really good sometimes when the client doesn't want to tell you what the real situation is.
Yes, absolutely. You can kind of get them to do placeholders. It sounds, when you talk about the universe being held together by like threads and knots, it's almost like you're trying to mease out that thread until you find the knot. That way you can help them untangle it.
Absolutely. And it's really important, particularly in my approach at least, that it's the client that does that.
Yep.
I do not want to be the one taking their agency from them. So we have a method called, can I demonstrate a quick method?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. This method, it's actually very popular on Instagram at the moment, but people have misinterpreted the method.
Yeah.
Because when I teach it, it's the non-verbal bit of it that's the important bit. So if, say, for example, quite often, and all of my methods come from real examples where I'm trying to figure out, everyone keeps asking me this, how am I going to deal with it? So a lot of people ask a reader, and certainly ask me, about hopeless situations. They really can't see a way out. That's why they've come to a tarot reader, for heaven's sake, and not not a lawyer or something. They really cannot see a way out, so they feel helpless and they feel hopeless. And so this method is called Finding Hope. And what I do is I say, right, okay, we're going to read for your situation, and I know you feel hopeless. And certainly in my NLP work, my therapeutic work, we're taught never deny a client their state.
Yep.
Don't try and say, oh, get over it, or oh, you'll feel better in a moment, or anything. I always acknowledge the client's state.
With NLP too, right? That's kind of like because it's for anyone listening, it's neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes.
And that's, you want to make sure that if you tell them those things, then that's what they're going to start programming, right? If you say, well, get over it, they'll start telling themselves. So it's intentionality, which is
yes, and from a neo-Ericksonian approach, from my another background in hypnotherapy, we call it incorporation and utilization. So I want to incorporate their state, not deny it or try and change it, and then utilize it. And this is where this method comes from. And 1,000 variations of this method. Once you start incorporating and utilizing things, it becomes easier. It becomes terrifying because you never know where you're going. But by incorporating and utilizing whatever the client is giving you and whatever the cards are giving you, you just go with it. So you have that oracular moment. So I might say to someone, I can't see if this is on the screen. So there we go. Right, so I'd say to someone, so I know you feel hopeless, but luckily enough, there is a card in the deck for hope. And that card is the star.
right.
And so what I'm going to do is get you to shuffle them. So I get them shuffled. I put it in their hands very deliberately. Say, it's in your hands. Look after my cards for me. I want you to shuffle them. because then I'm passing the agency back to them.
Absolutely.
And then I take it, and then I start to look through the cards, and see a bit. And I look through the cards, and I go, right, okay, we just need to find the star, and then I'm going to do this reading for you. It'll probably be at the bottom. It always is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hang on. I must have missed it.
Well, no, don't worry. While you do that, I'll say one of the things that I always do is give the client the cards to shuffle. And for some reason, I really feel like that flavor of them is passed on to that shuffle.
Yeah.
I've been trying to do general readings, and I really just keep finding myself in the general reading. And it's like, I don't know if it's actually a reflection, if it's something that we both have in common, if it's like something that I can help with because I understand it, but I really do feel like there's some kind of intentionality or flavor that's given to that deck at that moment.
Yeah, for sure. Now, can you see what's already happened? I snuck that by you because you assumed that I was having difficulties finding it. Now, what I'm going to do now is find it, and this is what I do with the client, and say, oh, I know it's in here somewhere. And then I go, hang on a second. No, just give me a second. The card of hope is definitely in here.
And it passes off the responsibility or the
well, first of all, it makes me look like I'm struggling. And what I might sometimes say, I don't usually say it so obviously, is, well, I hope I'm going to find it, because obviously
I hope there's hope in here somewhere.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that out loud at any point.
I love that.
And then I eventually find, I did see it a second ago, I went by deliberately a few times, but I wait until the client is looking really hopeless, and I'm amplifying, incorporating and utilizing that lack of hope. And then I go, oh, and the client will go.
They'll feel like they've reached that point, like it's
there is hope. There is hope in a hopeless situation. There is hope, and now they've embodied that for me. I've incorporated it. I've utilized it, and it's built into the cards. And then I say, right, so let's now read the two cards that were either side of the star card. And then I will read those two cards as a way out of their hopeless situation. But most of the work's already been done.
Right. Yes,
because we've demonstrated to the client that in any situation, there is always hope to be found. I've just symbolized it by a card in the tarot deck.
And before you're letting them kind of interpret the tarot or take it on, you're giving them back that agency to address their own problems, which maybe they were feeling a block anyway, which makes that next reading or whatever you do next more productive inherently.
Exactly. Because now we've made a state change, and now we're communicating within that state change. And to me, if you don't change somebody's state in a tarot card reading, then it's a wasted opportunity. It's not entirely pointless to just do a reading and for no state change to occur, but it's always a good opportunity within that space to really have state change take place, even a small one.
I love that. That's a really good way to put it too, is a state change, right?
Yeah. But then you can do it with any other card. So if the client says, I feel that everyone's against me, you can say, well, yeah, it must be awful if you think that everyone is really against you, and literally do this and then sit back from them and then go and find a card like that one.
Right.
Read around it, but actually to play with the state. And nowadays on Instagram, people do things like, oh, did you know the secret trick with tarot? If you want to find someone's spiritual purpose, shuffle the deck and find the sun card and read either card either side of it. Now,
Oh, interesting.
all of those methodologies can be codified, but that is not the point of why I invented that exercise.
Right.
It comes from being able to utilize the cards in a very symbolic way with the state. So yeah, state change is important, I think.
That's really interesting. I have a hard time with posting like a reading kind of thing because I feel like the algorithm absolutely kind of taints it, right? The algorithm knows what people want, it knows where they're going, or it kind of will want to influence them. And then that's not a great medium in between. But I know for your page, you do mostly like the art where you combine the cards.
Sure.
And I feel like that's a much more productive way to bring kind of tarot into it. But that's, I see what you're saying, where people are kind of, without the client there, that's kind of less of a good delivery system for a reading.
Yeah, it's not the whole point of the methodology. In Tarosophy, my first book, there's 50 exercises, and they are all trying to get a reader out of that. What spread do I use?
Yep.
I think there's a lot of different ways of utilizing the tarot beyond the spread. I've not used the spread for quite a while. I use one for the year ahead readings. I tend to use the Celtic Cross because when I was 13, when I was 13, I made my own little deck of major arcana, and they're currently lost in the Philippines at the moment because I took them out there. They found them, but they've not sent them back to me yet. Yes, I made a whole load of little cards, 22 cards, photocopied them from a book, and I would read the Celtic Cross with majors only, with reversals, for my friends who were all 13 or 14. And that was because no one had told me that might be tricky.
Yes, that's grand concepts for such young people.
Yeah, I never learned that, so I didn't have to unlearn it or find it a struggle. I'd never learned that it should have been a struggle. And again, this is one thing we also teach students as well, which is, we don't say things like, oh, well, the major arcana take a lifetime to learn, or if you do a card a day, you can learn these cards in 78 days, or anything like that. First of all, we split techniques or skills away from methods, because all of the books tend to teach methods, but they don't teach the skill that needs to be there to execute the method. So in all of our training, we make sure the person has the skill first of all, and then we show them the method. And we all have the skill to read, as we started off with, iconography, symbols. We can all look at a picture and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So knowing that most of the clients or students or people that you ever talk to already have that skill as adults or even as children, that means we can teach them to read the tarot. I have two different methods, one which takes 3 minutes and one which takes 10 minutes to read the whole deck for any question. But that's because I'm teaching a method only with the skill that I know the person has, which is to be able to read pictures.
When you say you read the whole deck, do you mean like the sequential order of all 78?
No, I mean that I had a little mental game with myself to say, if I was in a competition with other tarot card teachers and we were all given a person off the street and given 3 minutes to go into a booth with them and teach them tarot, and then those people had to then come out and fake it as a real tarot card reader, how would I win that competition? And so
teach them rapid fire, you mean? Kind of like, yes.
Yeah, be able to teach them to do any spread with any deck for any question. And so I developed a 3-minute method, which I now teach people, because it means that they can start reading without thinking it's difficult.
Right.
Then I say, now, it's a bit like chess. I can teach you the rules in an hour, but it's going to take the rest of your life to learn all of the openings, all of the end games, all of the mid-game strategies, and
how to read people and the different techniques other people use, because eventually in chess you can start to guess how the other person might go based off of their disposition, their kind of, yeah, absolutely. I see what you're saying for sure.
so we teach them in 3 minutes, and then we get them to do a reading, and usually people are then like, oh my God, oh wow. And then we can utilize that little bit of hope rather than start off a whole class with, oh, well, I've been reading 35 years and I don't suppose you'll ever get to the stage that I've got. But I'm going to teach you beginners some very basic things, but you're going to have to practice them for a long time. Don't read for other people, not yet, because of the ethical dilemmas that you might, all of the usual preamble that terrifies somebody.
Yeah, it kind of gatekeeps it, right? It's
for sure. Yeah.
It's definitely like a fault of younger people to take on like too many rules. I've noticed people who get much more experience definitely start to say, right, that oracular moment that you were talking about is something that comes about. It's more fluid, it's more creative, but at a younger stage, people keep themselves kind of shackled in. So that's a good thing to start with a beginner, to break those barriers down.
Yeah, for sure. So I was going to maybe talk about some of the theatrical symbols in the deck.
Nice.
If we've touched on reading and sort of approaching readings, but this is not quite an advert for the book, because I hate doing adverts and promos, but operators are standing by to take your call right now. This book is available, special offer. But this was a big research book published by Llewellyn called Secrets of the Waite Smith Tarot. And one of the things that we found in order to write the book, Charlie and I sort of existed in 1909. We shunted our mental mindset back to 1909 and refused to consider anything that had been written about the tarot after that point. Because it's impossible now to think, if Waite and Coleman Smith came now to see what had happened. I mean, when Waite wrote his autobiography towards the end of his life, he talked about a delightful experiment of the tarot. And it was still sort of in print, but it had died in interest and so forth. It existed between the 30s and the 50s in women's magazines.
Yeah.
It left the occult field, it went into women's magazines, and then it died again of interest. And then in the 60s and 70s, when Stuart Kaplan came along in the late 70s and then caught the last wave of the hippie movement,
absolutely,
published this deck. So it'd be really difficult for them to understand exactly what had happened to the iconography. The fact is you can walk up to almost anyone in the world and go, "What's this?" And they'll say, "It's a tarot card."
Yes, absolutely, for sure. Like, it's universal. It's interesting too. I mean, this is such an odd question, but do you know like the rules or how to play that game, like as like the old French game that they're kind of from?
Yeah.
I've always thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, I worked in Switzerland for 6 months, and I bought a tarot deck there and learned to play. So we played standard tarot with French cards and sometimes Italian cards as well. I'm just trying to find, there's an interesting one with this one. Yeah. So here's the thing. We went back to 1909 like time travel style. And we thought, so did they have a telephone? How did they work together? How long did it take them? And we looked at like the shipping records. Tali's a good family researcher, family history, genealogy researcher. And so she looked at all of the shipping records. So we traced where Pamela Collins Smith had gone to New York and then come back again and so forth, where Waite was living, whether they did have a telephone. And then we found some photographs at Small Hythe Place where Pamela likely went to stay with Ellen Terry for several months. And when we went there with the curator of the sort of archives at Small Hythe, we went through the photographs and the albums, and we were so pleased because there was one of Pamela Collins Smith in the background, and it had 1909 written on it.
Nice.
It actually had, and that was the first evidence we had. That's really where she was. And then we found a load of the things in that area in the house. For example, the chair that the Queen of Wands is sitting on.
And the reference material for the art. I was just going to say, did she do the art while she was there, or did she get the concepts and bring them back and do the art there?
She did it while she was there. And I don't know if we can see this, but
yes.
That is the coat of arms of Winchelsea, which is near Tenterden, which is where the house is. And this is the stylized version of it
on the 10.
So it's actually 3 flags, 3 lines, and 3 ships. So you can walk around Winchelsea and see this in the stained glass and on the stonework, and it's actually on the card itself.
And it's kind of 3 elongated angels.
It's actually 3 lions. Winchelsea was a shipbuilding port originally, and that's why we have on the 3 of Wands and 2 of Wands the ships going out to sea.
Nice. Because
where she was living when she was painting it or designing it, that's the history of the place, which she knew. But of course, everybody else around her knew that. And so when she painted the Queen of Wands, she actually painted, if I can find it, yes, we did this backwards, which in retrospect we definitely shouldn't have done.
You're going to keep people on their toes, right?
Well, I think I was a bit pretentious when we first started writing, and I wanted to keep it in a Kabbalistic order, 3 to Waite. But as a reference book, not so useful. So Snuffles, I'm just holding my finger on 2 different pages here.
Oh, this is her cat. Oh, this is the black cat and the Queen of...
Yes, on the Queen of Wands. So you can actually see the chair that... it's actually Edie Craig's cat called Snuffles. And Edie Craig, there's another painting that was done at the time where we can see Snuffles on that card, on that picture as well.
Yes.
And basically, if you go to Small Hythe Place, you can see the photographs of Snuffles, you can see the chair, the stool that she sat on, and that's Edie Craig holding the staffs that they were using to build trellis work in the garden that we also have photos of.
And so she, in a way, kind of is the Queen of Wands, at least iconography-wise.
And in terms of Edie Craig's character, she was in a lesbian relationship with 2 other women at the time, I think. And Small Hythe itself was known as an encampment of gypsies, is sort of the derogatory term, but it was all theatre people, and it was mainly women. And Snuffles, there were 2 cats there at the time. One was Snuffles, who's on the Queen of Wands, and the other was Sappho. So
very clear, a very clear kind of conclusion.
Yes, and the seven, the one I did want to go to was the Seven of Wands.
Yes.
And we know that a lot of people over the years, over the last 100 years, have had a lot of opinions about why he's wearing two different items of footwear.
Oh, I've never even noticed that.
Yeah, a lot of people have talked about it, a lot of people on the forums, a lot of people in books, and some people say it's Freemasonic and things like that, and whatever. But that is looking at it from here, 100 years later. In 1909, Pamela Common Smith was surrounded by theatre people.
Right.
She didn't know much about Kabbalah or the Golden Dawn. She was only a beginner there in the Golden Dawn. Waite wasn't there, so he must have given her some notes. And the only notes he could have given her were Book T, which was the Golden Dawn description of tarot cards. And we know that that's the case because in Book T, one of the cards says, for example, this card for the Seven of Pentacles is a labourer who works in the fields but doesn't profit. And she has drawn a person in the fields with a wilted potato crop in front of them. They're leaning on a potato hoe.
Okay.
So we know that's the text she was working for. But she go ahead.
Just a side note, would it have been rare for there to be a woman initiated into the Golden Dawn at that point?
No.
Interesting.
The Golden Dawn were open to men and women, and for a while, Florence Barr, the famous actress, was actually in charge of the Golden Dawn. And she was really, really keen on the teaching side of the Golden Dawn. She used to complain that adepts were coming to do their exams, their knowledge lecture exams, without the robes. So she wanted them in their robes, in the temple, doing their Kabbalistic and tarot tests.
That's really interesting to know, because I think on some level, it's become kind of a fraternal thing later on in like implications or writings.
Yeah, but again, that happened later. At the time, if we think about it, Pamela Common Smith was surrounded by women. They were worshipping Mary. They were very Catholic, mystical Catholic, magical Catholic, like Waite was. And the Golden Dawn were both men and women in equality. So when we think about the cards, then we have to think about Pamela's influence, and the actual model for this, which we on the Seven of Wands, is Petruchio. And Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew actually is described as having, I don't think we've got the exact quote here. Oh, here we have. Why, Petruchio is coming in a new hat and an old jerkin, a pair of old breeches thrice turned, a pair of boots that have been candle cases, one buckled, another laced.
Nice.
And we see on the card, if people want to go and look at that card clearly now, that Pamela Common Smith has actually drawn the buckles on one and the laces on the other.
That's amazing.
An unlaced shoe. And it's why the snail is on the Nine of Pentacles, for example.
That is so interesting, because I think that's what you were talking about. It gets kind of lost in translation, like a game of telephone throughout the years.
Exactly. And the same with the Nine of Pentacles. The Nine of Pentacles.
Oh, look at her. She's right there.
Yep. And you know why the snail is there? It's because this is a famous actress who would be known to Pamela and all of the theatrical people and would be instantly recognizable to them on this card, because they knew Shakespeare, and it's Ada Rehan as Rosalind in As You Like It. And the quote that goes with that is basically Rosalind in the garden saying, I would rather marry a snail than a man, because at least the snail comes with his own house.
That's amazing. Oh, that's hilarious on some level, but that's amazing. I would have never thought.
And that's why the snail is there. But here's the thing, as you were saying, to us, we've lost all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But when we went back to 1909 and just locked ourselves there, it became really obvious that Pamela Colman Smith was using the book T text from the Golden Dawn and drawing theatrical images. And this is why that book, that's where the research has come from, basically, to be true to the time it was devised and with the knowledge and expectations that they had, not to look back at it from our contemporary point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the Judeo kind of Christian imagery is so easy to see and sometimes very like blatant, but I wouldn't have ever, I don't know how I missed all of the Shakespearean references there. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's sort of obvious in retrospect, but we had to clear our brains of sort of 30 or 40 years of reading about the tarot in order to just go back to first principles with the research. And I think what you're saying is quite right with the Christian mysticism that's in the major arcana. That's Waite. Waite was only interested in the major arcana.
Interesting.
He had no interest in the minor arcana. In fact, there's some cases in Pictorial Key to the Tarot where Waite says, "Oh, I think on this card there's some pyramids or hills in the background."
Completely wrong.
Yeah, he's not sure and he doesn't really care.
That's interesting.
But with the major arcana, he really did care, because 10 years later, he went and designed a new deck. So Arthur Edward Waite designed a second set of tarot images 10 years later. But these were hidden for a century. Charlie rediscovered them in the British Museum. They were only used within his sort of magical, mystical order, the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. And they were never meant as a deck. We have a horrible idea someone at some point is going to try and produce these as a deck. But they were not meant as a deck. They were meant as mystical and spiritual images. This is the High Priestess.
And so that's the same major arcana, just used differently and imagined differently.
Yeah, so the High Priestess is here. You can see she's sort of drawing down the moon.
Yes.
This is long before Gardner picked up on the idea, and it made its way into witchcraft.
I was just going to ask that with drawing down the moon.
Yeah, but here the figure is drawing down the lunar influences. But this deck, or this set of images, was for temple work. So that you would be in the middle of a big ritual, and the image would be revealed to you as part of the ritual. So it was designed entirely for the major arcana, and it was designed for what Waite was really interested in the tarot, which was as a illustration of that mystical thing that we were just talking about. That sort of, it is Catholic in its iconography, but Waite was not your everyday Catholic. He was interested in the truth of reality, and he looked at alchemy and tarot and magic and religion and so forth in order to put it into the tarot.
Which I think so many of us do in modern day too, or like probably back then, is what sticks to you is what sticks to you, and what doesn't is kind of what you leave to the wayside, and it becomes a personal blend.
Sure. And I think I was looking at your magician that you've been drawing, and I was thinking about how we all Waite wanted to rectify the tarot.
Right.
And he used that word very, very specifically. He wanted to dispose of the idea that was prevalent at the time, which what makes him hard to read is he spends half of his books saying, "Oh, this is all nonsense. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. This person's wrong. This person's wrong." It's not how we write these days. Not usually, anyway. We don't spend most of our book slagging off our other authors or
right. Yes.
But Waite needed to do that because there was so much misinformation. People thought it came from ancient Egypt. People thought it was all sorts of things that he wanted to rectify. And I was thinking how Waite did it, and it just happened that then, for all sorts of reasons, became a sort of template in a sense. But now we're deconstructing it a lot and seeing the theatrical images, considering how an artist goes about it, considering what message Waite wants to put into it. We are all now rectifying it ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have an important job to do in terms of your rectification of the tarot.
Yeah, that's been a really interesting project. So I did the Fool first, and then the Magician is one that I just finished. I still feel like it's so hard to feel like you're doing the imagery justice, but it's at the same time, I don't know, I'm trying to really incorporate the feeling of my journey into it and then change what I can change. So the Fool, I put myself in a childhood place where I would go, and I changed the cliff up for a cliff that I used to play on as a child. And it's interesting to, so right now I'm working on the High Priestess, and I'm really trying to find like the flavor of witchcraft, but paying homage to the original kind of amalgam and changing and including more things. But what I've noticed too that I would speak on with that is a lot of these oracle decks or newer decks still have like that same feeling of the major arcana and then the suits. I have a friend who has almost put the task on me to create like a new, more modern tarot deck, because it's all a little bit antiquated, right? And so we almost do need a new one, right? I keep thinking how I would do it, as far as like now you would include like the policeman or like the extremist or like the fascist or the everything would be different, but then you still go into those same suits because you have to touch on those same kind of pieces of our lives.
Yeah, when we designed a set of major arcana with a Canadian artist actually called Janine Hall. It's an incredible oil paint artist, and these are just the major arcana. We sold out of these. We did a limited edition of them. It took us 12 years to do this. Just 22 cards. But this was a homage to the Waite Trinic cards, the second set of tarot images. But on one of the cards for Judgment, I wanted to put like the 4 aeons, the 4 big spaces of time, like the zodiacal ages, but the magical aeons, like the Aeon of Isis, the Aeon of Horus, the Aeon of Mart, and so forth. And for the Aeon of Horus, we put a World War I soldier with a rifle. We had 4 figures, and there's various other aspects to design, but putting a rifle on a tarot card, it was so incongruous, and I ummed and ahed over it for months and months and months, and but it's
things have changed. There's more context. We just look at things really differently.
Exactly, and like the court cards. I mean, a lot of people have tried to reconstruct the energies of the court cards because we don't really have that sort of hierarchical notion. It all belongs, like you were saying, it's sort of archaic, it's historic, it's to some extent perhaps even obsolete now. And what we've been trying to do over the last 30 years or so is just deconstruct the existing tarot and hope that everywhere else people will come at it like that isn't the monolithic template for tarot. Other things will now develop, and it's nice to see so many people out there working with the tarot and rectifying it, as I say, in their own ways.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I'll say that's interesting with that is with the court cards, right? A lot of people that I see, the page I've noticed moves from prince to page to, And it's almost like we no longer understand what a page would be, because the page would be the page boy for the night, not the prince, right?
Yeah, there's a Polish deck, it was Polish deck, that we used for one of our magazines when we used to do a tarot magazine. And that had the page holding the main card, was sort of like the page, but they were obviously holding the reins of the horse.
Yes.
And you could see the knight just behind them almost. And it was like, oh my God, that is genius, because the page is the page to the knight. Papers had an interesting idea that the kings and queens represent people, and the pages and knights represent their thoughts towards us.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And,
like a reflection of the lower chords. That.
Yeah. So they are not people. The only things that represent people or personified aspects of our world or parts of ourselves are the kings and queens, whereas the pages and knights represent two ways of them thinking about us, or those parts of us and their energetic influence on us. And I mean, Papers was writing before Waite and everyone else, so it's quite an old idea, but I think there is a lot of room to just reorganize the court cards by keeping their structure. Why it's 78 cards, I don't know. Why it has to be 4 elements by 10? Well, maybe we've got 10 fingers, so everything goes in tens, like the Kabbalah and everything else. Even string theory has like 10 dimensions, sort of 6 and then 4 and stuff, like the Tree of Life has the veil and so forth. So
like it helps us organize it mentally, kind of. What I'll ask you, that's kind of probably a tough question, is which came first, the Rider-Waite tarot or playing cards? Playing cards must be older, right?
Oh yes, yeah, for sure.
Definitely. I almost feel like it's a mimicry of playing cards in a way, is why we have it that way. But at the same time, I know that there's differences to it.
Yeah. There was a lot of argument with the Golden Dawn and around that time, Eliphas Levi and so forth, as to, like the order of the cards, where the pool should go and the numbers of the cards. And
where the ace goes.
Yeah, and it was like, and then the Golden Dawn half-inched it to astrology. Now, astrology is not my thing, but I struggle to make sense of the usual attributions between astrology and tarot. And the people that made it work a lot better, that's for sure. I've met a lot of astrologers who have looked at it and gone, that doesn't make any sense. It should be like this. And they've done a far better job of it. But yeah, it is odd that it is, what's the word? It's just stabilized. It's just stabilized at 78 in that pattern, 22 majors and so forth. And it just so happens 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, 22 paths on the Tree of Life, 4 elements, 10 levels on the Tree of Life and so forth. So it just helps that it fits that template as well.
Right. And that kind of speaks to how people go about gatekeeping it, or keeping it too serious, or keeping people feeling like there's so many layers that they'll never learn. And that's why you have to trust them, right? Is just burying it in things that are, I mean, that's right, the meaning of the occult, right, is just making it feel hidden. Yeah, I can see that. And I do agree kind of that I've thought about that a lot, where the 4 suits and I don't know, I have a hard time going in with numerology, and I have a hard time with astrology going in, but when it comes to astrology, I have a very scientific approach to astrology. I actually had a hard time getting into tarot because astrology was so left-brained, and I was like, well, we have somewhat of evidence. I mean, it's interesting with astrology, I always harken back to a Shakespearean quote, and that's the music of the spheres, right? Like the idea that as the planets move, they're creating like a frequency, a sound, a song. But that's interesting that, yeah, I have a hard time with people who do too many correlations, because at some point it gets buried.
Yeah.
with the courts, I'll say this too. I've been doing readings for America, which have been kind of difficult to mease out. In this last one, I kind of ended up landing on the page. I had a difficult time because right now what we're dealing with, I drew three of the kings. And so I was like, well, in America, we're really dealing with a kingship, like a hierarchy that's really out of our control, like you were saying, a view onto the people. And the future was a page, the Page of Cups. And I was trying to figure out how that ends. And I ended up falling on like Congress and the Senate and the smaller forms of government. But the view of people is an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't thought of that. Or the view of the authority.
Yeah, it's perhaps, yeah, it's often difficult to interpret from singular symbolism to the wider, to a wider situation. But if the page is quite often like the Page of Cups is perhaps how people are responding to it. Like,
yes.
you know, there's a constant different fish coming out of the cup all of the time. And for a while, that's exciting. It's very novel, and you can't really do anything with it. You can just be surprised by it and stuff. But eventually, people don't want that. There's a sort of flip side for the Page of Cups. The Page of Cups has got no interest in sorting out anything that the Page of Wands or the Page of Pentacles or the Page of Swords might want to sort out. So the Page of Swords is like more to do with like diplomacy and education. Page of Pentacles, maybe obviously finances, government business, and all of this practical stuff, the cost of eggs and things. And then the Page of Wands is about the spiritual side of things, the ethical side, the values, and so forth. So having just a Page of Cups is just going to drown everyone at some point, and people will want the other three because we are all of those things. Government has to be all of those things. They are like the government departments that are currently being rectified themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And it's also, I always look at the Page of Cups specifically almost like naivete through imagination. But the Page of Cups is a harder one to look at. Do you know, this is an interesting side question on that, though. Do you know what the symbolism of that fish is, where it kind of came from? Is it like a Jesus fish or?
No, it's actually far simpler. It's just an elemental fish.
Right.
One of the things we found with our research is that quite often people say things like astonishing things like the minor arcana, images of the decans. And the thing is Pamela Coleman Smith, this deck took us 12 years to do, 22 cards. This deck, Pamela Coleman Smith took 5 months to do.
God bless her. That is so much art to do.
Yeah, she did it in 5 months. So when people say, "Oh, you don't know enough about tarot yet," and you've not spent enough time designing your deck, just say Pamela Coleman Smith knew very little about the tarot.
Yes.
And she wasn't interested in it. Waite wasn't interested in the minors, and they knocked it off in 5 months. So that's my barrier of entry. As long as it's more than 5 months and you know a bit about the tarot, you're already doing better than these guys.
Yes. That breaks down the barrier too, right? All of that pressure we put on ourselves. One of the things I had to learn is knowing the numbers will take time. I always use the imagery. My one pet peeve with tarot, I'll say, is when it's a deck that just says the number 10 with a stick on it. And it's like, let's pull back that imagery. We need to kind of mise that out, because then I notice people kind of making things up a lot more. And then they have the license to make things up a lot more. Like you were saying in the beginning, you kind of have more of a license to impress yourself, project, or read from ego if the client can't see the imagery, or you might have forgotten what the card means, and then you just start pulling.
Yeah, for sure. I think sorry, I was both listening and seeing if I could find what Mathers had said about three kings.
Yes.
I'll find that in the Golden Dawn book. I'll find that in a second.
Your time.
Yeah. I think with the pip cards, that's my 10-minute method teaches how to read the pip cards, any deck, but also pip cards. My 3-minute method can only work with a sort of fully illustrated or scenic deck, we might call it.
Yes.
But yeah, I've always had a difficulty with Tarot de Marseille decks. But yeah, I think you really have to dive into the numbers with that and have some sort of structure in mind with it.
Do you see that numerology plays into it? Does the 10 in each deck have the same kind of flavor? I've never really compared them too much.
I think for me, it's just so built into me, the sort of Kabbalistic structure. Mm-hmm. So I tend to see, and to be honest, that's built into the deck, the Waite Smith designs.
Yes.
Because whilst Pamela Collins Smith wasn't first, and coming back to the fish symbol,
right.
She wasn't consistent. A lot of people nowadays have this sort of romantic idea that poor Pamela Collins Smith was a sort of disenfranchised, downtrodden female artist who was taken advantage of by big corporate a stick in the mud like Arthur Edward Waite and so on. And that was not the case at all. We have a load of evidence that Pamela Collins Smith was a nightmare to work with. Even her later life, when she was far more religious, the church were having difficulties working with her and things.
A classic artist, really, at the end of the day.
For sure. But even other artists, we have people like Yeats and Yeats's brother, W.B. Yeats's brother, recording that she does too much and she tries too much and she's just a nightmare to work with. But she was not consistent. So the Golden Dawn had a animal symbol on all of the quartz, and it was either couchant lying by the side like a tiger or leopard, or it was a turtle or a fish for each of the ranks. And Pamela Collins Smith uses it in a few places. So, like you said right at the beginning about the cherubs in the
yes,
throne carved in, and also we have shells on the Queen of Cups, and we have the rabbit in the corner of the Queen of Pentacles, and so on. But she was just not consistent. If she'd have been a bit more consistent, we would have had a far more obviously Golden Dawn Kabbalistic deck than we do. So that fish is basically there to, it's like the animalistic emblem of the water element at its lowest level. And that's really what it is. But unfortunately, you can't then find that in the other court cards.
Yep.
Because she just wasn't consistent with it.
On some level, would you say like that's kind of a channeling, like with Sabian symbols or something like that? You're pulling, they're like pulling from their own mind what they're getting. Do you feel like she was maybe intuiting, kind of?
Sure. The reason that deck is the Templar is because it was such a unique meeting of two people and their abilities. Waite had structure, he had scholarship, he had all sorts of things. He also had the ability to be inspired by a lot of other people and then denigrate them, i.e. plagiarize them and not mention it. But Pamela Collins Smith had this ability to picture things. She illustrated for plays, she was a theatrical designer, and she illustrated children's books. And that singular skill of taking a narrative and being able to draw one picture
and tell a whole story.
Oh, the whole story for children then layered itself onto this really intense Catholic, magical, Kabbalistically based Golden Dawn structure that they'd synthesized all of the teachings from Kabbalah, from ancient Egypt, from alchemy, from astrology, from numerology. And Pamela Collins Smith went, well, I could draw that like that.
Yes, I love that.
And she was fast. At one point, she wrote Steiglitz, her agent in America, and said, "This weekend I've done 150 paintings. I think 75 of them are viable.
Yes.
They're good enough for a gallery in a weekend."
That's insane.
And that's partly why she was chosen to do this. But coming back to your question, Waite actually said, "Oh, I had to remove her from London in order that she wasn't influenced by the psychic energies of other magicians around her." And
I love that.
we think, we've got no proof, but we think that was just to get around the fact that she had to go babysitting for 6 months to earn money with Ellen Terry and stay there, because he was going to pay a little bit of money for this project, but she didn't have it in time for Christmas. And she wrote that in a letter. So she got the book T descriptions with its intense, pure Kabbalistic structure, and then attacked it like a children's story.
Yes.
And so what's the best way, from my experience, from theatrical background, of drawing that? And as a result, that so unlikely. We sometimes say that the tarot is the greatest secret passed through the most unlikely of hands.
Yes.
And and that's what happened with it. So each of these is a unique blend of real deep occult Kabbalistic structure and sheer fairy tale storytelling.
That is amazing. And there is something to be said about a stage background, right? A theater background, because those sets have to be tossed together. The lighting has to be they only have so much time, and everything has to serve the story. If it doesn't serve the story, then you don't have time to do it. And then every blocking, there's a lot of blocking. She did a lot of there are moments where there are people in peace or sitting still, but there are cards where she's capturing kind of that Baroque idea, right, of in the moment, the dramatic moment is more important than like the Renaissance moment of stillness and strongness.
Yeah.
Even the court cards, really, they're sitting in thrones, but typically most of them are doing something, right? Like the Queen of Cups has her foot in the water. Yeah,
and there are things going on in the environment. So the actual structure of the card, like design-wise, at the time in the theatre, and we have some images in the book, it was very popular, a bit like today we have collector's cards, like Magic the Gathering cards and things like that. Back in Victorian times, late Victorian times, they had cabinet cards, and these were often photographs of actors and actresses, and it was a way of the theatre production company also making money. And they were always staged, like you were saying, with the blocking and so forth, in a particular way. They always had the character, they had a prop, and they had something to give perspective, usually a wall or a stage line or a boat, all sorts of weird things to give the picture perspective. And we can see that on most of the cards. There's always a figure, a prop, and something to give perspective.
That is so interesting, especially with that kind of trading card mentality, because if you got a card, you wouldn't want to just know the actor, you'd want to know the play that they're in at that moment.
Exactly. So here we have Falstaff. That is actually Falstaff. And there is a line in one of the historical plays where Prince Henry says to Falstaff something like, you are sitting around on a bench all day with your unbuttoned shirt, surrounded by sacks on cups of wine, and you have forgotten to ask that which you would truly wish to know.
Yes.
And it fits the card. It fits the 9-stage Kabbalistically in the world of Bria, the world of cups, the world of creation. It's at that stage where you have got so far that you could stop, but you're not quite there yet. So there's a sense of complacency and so on. And she has picked the exact scene, the exact lines in the play to match the Golden Dawn structure, done it as a cabinet card, as a collector's card, and then moved on to the next one. And it's just...
I wonder how much of that has to do with Waite kind of writing them off, if it seemed like cachet almost, because there were those other collecting cards, and he wanted them to be kind of a grander theme.
Didn't want it in the hands of fortune tellers. That was the last thing he wanted.
And so do you think you said that she spent her time in like a gypsy encampment. Do you think that that's kind of how they ended up there, and then were kind of devalued because of the cultural view of...
I think they were devalued by Waite, but you know, we're human beings. Give us a pack of tarot cards for fortune telling. What are we going to do with it? We're not going to listen to one of the designers, particularly after they're dead, who says, I do not want this to fall into the hands of fortune tellers. That's exactly what we're going to use it for. So in effect, what we have done as a culture with tarot is we have denigrated Waite and put him into the background, elevated Pamela Coleman Smith as the misunderstood artist who was actually the designer of the entire deck and taken advantage of because it's always known as the Rider-Waite Tarot. But again, that's a lie. It was known as a tarot deck.
Yes.
It's us who later on called it the Rider-Waite deck and then said, oh,
differentiate, right?
Yeah, I mean, we always call it the Waite Smith deck because that's the nomenclature that we use for decks. It's the designer, the artist, and we don't use the publisher. We refer to a publisher of a deck, but we call the deck usually either the name that the designer has given it, like the Thoth Tarot, or in this case, the Waite Smith Tarot. So it's both of them.
And like Crowley has his, and then everyone kind of has their iterations. I mean, even today, there's like I use a gilded set. I can't think of what it's called. I've had it so long, the box kind of dissolved around it. Now I just call them my cards, you know. But yeah, that is really interesting that one thing I cannot get out of my head is you said that she was with a troupe of actors when she was doing it. So I almost can see actors will run lines and do little skits and like run scenes with each other. I wonder how often she was watching a scene and kind of sketching out what she was seeing while they were playing on the stage.
I think my work here is done because you're exactly right. They were often...
Lovely. Yes, lovely.
They were often, and we have the photographs, so as the kids these days would say, we have the receipts.
Yes.
They were building a trellis work at the time.
Yes.
And so when you look at the Five of Wands, we weren't able to publish it in the book because we literally ran out of money to license all of the images we wanted to use. But there is a photograph of them holding the women in their smocks with their cigarettes, holding the trellises, and they look as if they're about to have good fun fighting each other with them. And you can bet that Five of Wands was a real scene.
I love that. I love that too, because that's it kind of modernizes the view of it, because it's really easy to think of them as almost like a Renaissance kind of moment, but they were kind of more modern, right? There were telephones and they were smoking rolled manufactured cigarettes, and this is very interesting. Is this the book you wrote, Tarosophy, or which book is this?
This is all I've concentrated, for today at least, on Secrets of the Waite Smith Tarot book.
A book I'll find.
Which is published by Llewellyn. It says revolutionary insights about the world's most popular tarot deck. So yeah, we tried to make it as original as possible. We didn't want to put anything in there that had already been said about the tarot, because we try with our work, at least with our writing, to do new stuff, because that's where our excitement is with, and our passion for the tarot is, to explore different ways of using it and different sides of its history and so forth.
I love that. Your passion for tarot is really deep then, right? Because you said you started reading at 13. Have you always kind of had the inclination, as long as you can remember, towards the occult and like mysticism and...
Sure. I was initiated into a Gardnerian coven, a traditional Gardnerian coven, so fully naked and so forth. When I approached them when I was 16 and was told to study for 2 years and come back when I was 18 for obvious reasons in very traditional English Gardnerian covens for the initiations. So I just had that all the way from
childhood, right? Like you were feeling drawn, and then it isn't until you're older. I've talked to mediums about this on these interviews too, is almost there is like something in mysticism where you have to experience your childhood on some level, right? You have to have it cut off from you. You have to go do your schooling. You have to kind of be a human being for a little bit. So I can see why they would push you off for a minute.
Yeah, and like my parents were, like my dad really supported me. He's still alive, and he asked for a copy of every book when it's and he gets me to sign it because he says it might be valuable in the future. My dad used to be an accountant, so he has that mentality. But he did buy me Stuart Kaplan's Encyclopedia of the Tarot for my 15th, 16th, and 17th birthday when it came out. Was each year for those years. So they really supported me.
Have you always been a writer?
No, actually, I did a video on my YouTube channel a little while ago about the I have over there, just there. That is my rejection letter from Llewellyn when I was 21.
Yes.
I sent them a draft for the Magician's Kabbalah. I'd written a book on Kabbalah, and they wanted it, but they wanted some changes, editorial changes.
Right.
And I spent 3 months working on that and not earning any money. And my family at the time were very desperate for money. And by the time I'd done all of the changes, sent it back, they said, "Oh, sorry, we're not interested anymore." There's some other books that have come out that are very similar about the Kabbalah. And I was furious and I was disconsolate, and I couldn't write another word for 5 years after that. And then I just lost any interest in writing. So it wasn't until about 10, 15 years ago that someone said, "You should write a book on the tarot." And I said, "Oh no, I'm never ever going to do that again." Which is ironic, because now we have a very good relationship with Llewellyn. But
I was going to say, you have a whole page on their website that has a whole you've co-authored and written over 50 books.
Yeah.
But, a decent amount of them were published through them.
Yeah, five through Llewellyn, and I contributed to their complete book of ceremonial magic.
Right.
Again, we have a good relationship, because they approached me for that. They were going to use somebody else, and then it didn't work out, and so they gave me about 8 weeks to write my section on that. They're giving everyone else about over a year, 18 months. They said, "Can you write it, but it needs to be in 8 weeks to the same standard as everyone else." So that was a good task. And it was the first time I felt like I was a jobbing author.
Yep.
Like I'm paid to write words, and I'm paid to write them in a particular way for a particular audience. So but it's taken 35, 40 years to start to feel as if I can call myself an author. And I sometimes say to Talia as well, "How many more books do you need to write before you think that you're an author?" So it's always a bit precarious, that sort of feeling internally of making sure that you won't say certain things. At the end of the day, I realized that it doesn't matter about me. It's people want to know about the tarot. They're interested in the tarot. So I have a passion for that. So I can engage people's passion for the tarot and try not to be in their way of their discovery, because then I get to see their passion for it. Yeah. And that is the best thing in the world for me, is to see someone have that moment with the cards, whatever it is, whether it's about designing them, drawing them, doing a reading, suddenly realizing something, reading someone and getting something out of that. It's nice for other people it's nice for everyone to discover the tarot. That's where I come from these days,
And doing it at a young age is really interesting too. I know for me, it took a long time for me to learn them, get into them, do them, kind of break away from the books after I've learned the books. I was, I think, 15 years old, and it dates when I did it, but I was like 15 and I stole them from a Borders. It was a moment where I remember, because there's such a stigma about them, that I also, this is so ironic to think about, I also stole a rosary just to even it out.
Yeah. You're an equal opportunities pilferer.
Yeah, well, luckily I don't anymore, but at that age, it's really funny to think of all the things that you'd take as a teenager. For me, it was a tarot card deck and then a rosary, just in case my Catholic grandmother was watching from heaven. But yeah, that passion is really something that lights up. It's interesting you touch on something that is kind of why I do this, is because I feel like a lot of us spend our whole careers talking to and about other people in readings or about tarot, and so often our stories kind of get overwritten or ignored. But it sounds like you have a really interesting story as far as how you were drawn to it, how you worked towards it. Yeah, I think that's really cool. For the record, I think that's really cool beyond all of the writing about tarot. Kind of how you found it, because you started garden. How would you put it? Gardenarian.
Yeah, gardenarian. So I went to an occult shop in Derby where I lived, I lived 10 miles away, but I got on my bike and cycled there. And I was about 13, I was first interested. And it was when I was 13, I went to a very progressive school. And again, thank my blessings for being supported by my parents, and also going to a progressive school. And in our religious studies course, we had an afternoon where they brought a New Age person in, and she taught us astrology, tarot, and dowsing.
Interesting.
And we all went out to the fields, the playing fields, with our little pens with a bent coat hanger. So we took the middle out of the pen, the biro pens, and put the coat hanger in bent, and held the things and let the coat hanger. And we found this line across the fields. And we our little team went to the teacher and said, we found a line. Look, we've drawn it out and stuff. And the teacher said, so what are you going to do? And don't know. And they said, well, you're going to test it, aren't you? And we said, well, how are we going to test it? And they said, why don't you go and see the caretaker, the janitor, the groundsperson, and see if they've got plans for the school.
For like what's buried there, right? Yeah. Like if it's a pipe or a wire.
And we had found, the janitor got them out, we looked at the plans, and we showed them the map we'd made, and it was the water system to the tennis courts that we had found in the field. And for me, that was like, this is all real.
Validation.
Not only is the dowsing real, but then that must mean that the astrology, I was only 13, the astrology in the tarot was real. So that weekend, I went to the adult library and I went upstairs and I said, I'm I'm not in the adult library, but can I get out a book? And they got it out in my dad's name, and it was Stuart Kaplan's book on tarot. And that had the major arcana illustrated in the middle of it, the Swiss IJJ deck. And my dad had one of the very first big old photocopiers at his place of work. So Saturday afternoon, I then took the book, I put it on the photocopier, and that's where I made my little cards from, that I still have to this day.
Yes.
And I sellotape them together onto little bits of cardboard that I cut out from the back of a cereal box, and then I put them in a little bag that is now in the Philippines, and took them to school and started reading for my friends on the Monday. And it wasn't until about 8 years ago that he's now sadly departed, but Stuart Kaplan, I got to meet Stuart Kaplan because Tali and I went to visit them at US Games to talk about some projects we were doing. And I was telling Stuart Kaplan that story, and I was telling him how thankful I was of his book and how it had inspired a lifetime of study and so forth. And he looked at me and said, "Sorry, I'm just trying to think of the royalties that you might owe me."
That one. Oh, for the little duck.
Yeah.
How much you made off those readings?
Exactly. So I'm with you in terms of the pilfering, but don't let anyone know because
Intellectual property is different.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. With dowsing, so is that very European? What I've heard for dowsing is they do it a lot in the Appalachians.
For sure. It's not something that I particularly followed up on or anything. I've dowsed the lost items before, but nowadays I tend to use things like the Sabian symbols. My astrologer friend just down lives close by. He's written a book on the Sabian symbols, and I tend to use his app on my phone. So even though I will read tarot for myself, over the last few years, I just love the Sabian symbols. They always make me laugh because they're always so off their time and yet so appropriate.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah, I do. When I do astrology readings, I use Solar Fire, which is the program that, I figured you knew. And they incorporate Sabian symbols into birth charts. And I didn't want to use them at first because, like I said, I try to keep astrology kind of more scientific, which is ironic to say, right? But the Sabian symbols, as soon as I started using them, people would be like, oh, yes, no, I do have that. And even the generationally, I noticed things like I did my mother's birth chart, and there's certain things that feel problematic almost. Like I think one of them was a colored child playing with a group of uncolored white children. And at first I was like, oh, well, I don't know if I like that one. And then where it fell in her birth chart was literally the generation of, I talked to her about this and I was like, were you allowed to play with children who weren't white around? And she said, no, that really was something that kind of came about as I was growing up. And there was, I can't remember what the other one was, but it coincided exactly with like the feminist movement and the time of her life that she would have finally been able to open a credit card. And so whether it's a small thing like someone's childhood, like they say, oh, yes, I do. There was a white bird in my childhood, or a generational flavor. I've really grown to respect and love the Sabian symbols.
Yeah, I tend to refer to them as my secret weapon. I don't do them for other people. I use I think the app is Lynn Birkbeck is the astrologer that I'm talking about, and he's been doing astrology for a good 40 years as well. So weird coincidence, we found ourselves living on literally either side of a river from each other with a bridge between us that we could walk across and meet each other and stuff.
I love that.
It's like the astrology on one side and the tarot card reader on the other.
Yes, they're very different, but they do coincide a lot, a lot, really. And I wouldn't, it's what we were saying earlier. I have a hard time correlating pieces to it, but they go hand in hand. If you do tarot or you do astrology, you'll find the other, and they may be very different practices, but
Yeah, I'd recommend for anyone viewing, say from my or your audience, I do a lot of work over the years with the Inner Guide meditation by Edwin Steinbrecher, and that is a great way to experientially merge your tarot and astrology together. Uh, Usually it's on my pile of books over here that
you have quite the library around you, honestly. I noticed that.
yeah, I counted recently, or just roughly estimated, I think, because this is only one room and I've got about 6 different rooms, not
Yeah.
all in this building, with books. I've collected all of the books since I was 12, 11 maybe. I've certainly got about, I think it's in the order of 4,000, maybe up to 6,000 books.
There's no moving houses for you.
Uh,
Stuck where you are.
Oh, tell me about it. But yeah, the Inner Guide meditation. This is a very simple method. It's very safe. It's something I teach a lot to beginners. And again, it allows where we started off, talking about agency. This gives any person a good way of exploring their own journey, their own symbolism, applying tarot, applying astrology, and learning it, and also incorporating it into their life. And in my sort of syllabus, I guess, of teaching Western esoteric stuff, this is I tend to teach people a few esoteric ritual type things first, but then yeah, for most of their work, I'll introduce them to that. So if anyone's interested, you can do it by yourself. I did it when I began for several years with a friend, and we'd spend like every other day doing a Inner Guide meditation and writing it down and stuff. But yeah, it's that's a good way of merging the astrology and tarot to whatever level you're learning or comfortable with, and you don't have to use either of them for the method either.
So with your personal life, do you use tarot and astrology? Well, do you use tarot for yourself very often? Yes.
Yeah. I've gone through phases, and when people ask about what happens if you get burnout or you can't seem to be working with tarot, for me, and what I recommend people, readers, students, friends, and so forth, is I tend to shift to another divination system.
Yep.
And my favorite, as was Crowley's. Crowley hardly used the tarot. He mainly used the I Ching. And I've used the I Ching almost as long as I've used tarot. So,
I think, is that the sticks? Or
yeah, or coins. And Crowley actually invented his unique way of working with them, which I've republished as well, called the I Ching tokens or the I Ching coins. And use these little coins with the I Ching symbols on either side and an 8-sided dice.
Interesting.
From sort of Dungeons and Dragons styly approach to it. Yeah, so I tend to use the I Ching. At the moment, Sabian symbols is my go-to tool. Tarot, I Ching, runes. I've gone through phases of using the runes. And those phases tend to be about a year to 2 years, and then I just find myself coming back to tarot. The advantage of having done this for 45 years is you have plenty of time to go in and out of things. So,
and that's the best way to learn, right? You mix it
Sure.
and you use it throughout. This is a very odd question. Are you a Golden Compass fan, Philip Pullman?
I found myself struggling to get into the Golden Compass, but the alethiometer idea I just loved, because there's a lot of I think that does have 36 symbols or something. It's very close to the Lenormand in its structural components.
Later on in the Amber Spyglass, there's a scientist, and she kind of moving out of science to get into it gets very religious at the end, right, with angels and stuff. I Ching is something that she uses, and it comes up in it as her form of divination, and that's why I was asking and it has those same like symbols you were talking about pulling out of people in the beginning, right, like the crucible and but that was just a side note question.
I quite like the I Ching because tarot tends to be like we were talking about the blocking and like particularly with the court cards, and the way particularly I guess Westerners in its most generic sense read the tarot is as a snapshot.
Yep.
It's like this is this, this is this, this is now, this is future. It's very Platonic, as Alfred Whitehead said, we're all footnotes of Plato. We're stuck in that dualistic structural world. And to me, the I Ching is far more of a flow. When you're doing an I Ching reading, particularly the full method with the sticks, it's already moving. You have the moving lines whilst you're reading it. So you always have a sense of...
It's more involved, right? Like you kind of are arranging, or you're... Yes.
And also the reading itself is sort of like, well, it's the fox gets his tail wet in the water, but it's already moving to the next hexagram. So you get the I Ching is very flowy. The tarot is very narrative, linear, and the runes for me are very moral and abstract. Because they're always sort of teaching stories with each rune. So yeah, each divination system has its own place, I guess.
Yeah. Have you ever done what is it, stone throwing?
Yeah. I did.
Oh, you were in the Philippines. That's something they do down there, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's so many methods. There's like the whole cowrie shell method and so forth. And that is taught orally in terms of almost songs and rhymes that you have to learn for different patterns. And there's hundreds of them that are taught and you have to learn them. But I have used geomancy quite a bit as well, which you can do by throwing things on the ground and making marks, or you can have a bit of paper and do it with a pen. And you basically count whether the marks are odd or even, and then you build a figure, which is sort of like a hexagram, but not quite. And then you interpret that figure, but then you break the figure down into like sons and daughters and a courtroom of a good witness and a bad witness and a judge and so on. And it's a very developed system that has roots in astrology, but it's also how the Golden Dawn designed their minor arcana and how Crowley. If you have a look at several of Crowley's minor arcana, they're geomantic symbols.
What is so geomantic?
Geomancy, yeah.
Got you. I'm going to look into that. That's interesting because for me, I mean, there are so many different forms of divination. Really, palmistry is a big one that I really like. I'm still kind of making my way through Chiero's.
Oh yeah.
Yep, his book. He is a very interesting figure. I don't know, it gets easier and easier, but it is a very kind of complex systems. And I've noticed the more I read different people, the more I realize it is very hard because we all have such different hands. Do you have any experience with anything like that?
I think so. I think palmistry taught me not to be snooty about other people's methods. When I was younger, I like to think I've grown out of it, but I went with somebody to a palmist, like a fake gypsy palmist on a beachfront in England, and I was so when we were waiting in the tent that was all done up to, be proper sort of,
The show.
the show. And I was like, we're not going to say anything just in case they're listening or they've got a recording device or something. So I went in and they looked at my palm and they said, well, this line, your career line. I was, I think, 17 or 18. And they said, you're going to end up working in France. But it's weird. It's not France. It's like France, or maybe it's a French-speaking country that I'm seeing. And they were really confused. They were saying it's right on the line, but it's definitely France, or a French-speaking country. It's like both, but neither. It's really weird.
That's odd.
And I left, and I said to my friend, I said, they know my age. They know I'm probably into IT, which I was, and they probably think I'm going to end up working in Canada or somewhere. 6 months later, I was working in Switzerland on the border, literally, of France. I lived in France, and I crossed the border every day into Switzerland to work. And then I met a load of New Age people in Switzerland, and virtually there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't cross that border between France and the French-speaking country. And it was 6 months later, out of the blue, I was at college. I had no intention of moving abroad to work or anything. An opportunity came up to my college, and I applied for it. Didn't think I'd get it, and then I ended up. And when I arrived, I didn't even know that I was going to end up living there for a while or anything. It was just, And ever since then, I've met some really, 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 really good palmists.
That's insane. I wouldn't think that you could find a country on it. But that's very. What's ironic is the teachings that I've gone through for palmistry are very, very kind of UK based, right? Chiara was a Irishman. And Roz Levine was one of the first books that I got, and she's British. But I have never seen anything or heard of anything like that. That's fascinating. I could pick your brain forever. I think we're going on about 2 hours though, but
oh gosh, okay. well, it's been a great conversation so far. Hopefully this year, when you were asking about where. Let's say I am going to do a lot more outreach this year, because we've been so buried in our books and writing for so long. We've done some TarotCon events, we've done those worldwide and so forth, and we might start those up again. We did some in the States. That might be more tricky these days, but it's so rewarding to have these conversations and so forth, and to pick up on, share people's passions as well, and all of the different ways we come at things. I think that's so important. Particularly again these days, it's very important for people to find their own. With a tarot, it's really important everyone finds their own voice in it.
Yes.
They're not taught to read a certain way, or they're not told a certain thing. Unless it's just a fact, like tarot, this deck was designed in 1909. Yeah, you can teach that sort of thing. But with methodology and skills, everyone has such a unique voice in their life. And tarot is just a great way of channeling that voice, and usually the other person doesn't know what it is yet. I don't know what it's going to be, so it's good to have the conversations that open that person up to you do your tarot.
I love hearing different perspectives of how people find things. I mean, so you're like a very traditionally initiated kind of intellectual academic approach. And then there still are common threads that I find with people whose approaches are as simple as mediumistic as a child, and it comes back later on. And tarot, again, is a tool that everyone, well, not everyone, but basically everyone who does readings will use at some point, and they will all use it so differently that that reaching out and finding out these amazing things is, I mean, I absolutely will be getting the book that you were talking about where you went through all of the references for them, because that is fascinating to hear about.
I mean, doing research like that, it did change the way I read tarot cards. So there is a sense of, some people might say that knowledge can get in the way of the intuition, but certainly the way I teach stuff, you can only intuit something that you know something about. A car mechanic, you can drive the car in and he'll go, oh, I think your gasket's gone, front gasket. It's like, how do you know that? And he was like, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. It's just maybe the way the car sounds or the way you're driving it, something. That's intuition. Whereas a brain surgeon and neurologist can be in the middle of the life and death operation and just go, I need to cut that. And when he's asked about it or she's asked about it, it's going to be like, she won't know.
Yep.
And that's intuition. But I would not want the mechanic intuiting anything about my brain surgery. And I wouldn't trust the brain surgeon to fix the wheels on my car.
Yes, absolutely.
So intuition, I think, whether you're a medium or a tarot card reader or an astrologer or a counselor, therapist, Jungian therapist in tarot, I only think you are allowed to intuit things if you have the knowledge there for the intuition to arise into. Otherwise, it's known as what's the word in English? Oh, guessing.
Yes, literally. Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, you can say, and you can guess the meanings of the cards and you can rely on that to some extent, but it doesn't, it's important to understand that is what the person is doing, and for that person to be honest about that. I'll have a reading from someone who says, I'm just going to guess what the cards mean and lay them out. That's fine. But I don't like when people are saying, oh, I'm channeling this from Zathras, the fourth angel on the planet Zog, when they're obviously just guessing.
Yes, absolutely. And too much of a show sometimes. So much of a show sometimes just to say something that they could have said they were pulling out of nowhere. Obviously, everyone's kind of got their own thing, and I listen and I don't judge. But
yeah, sometimes I still judge in the sense of if somebody, I think over the years, I still sometimes, it's not maybe as much these days, but sometimes people have used tarot so that they can give advice, because if the tarot cards weren't in their hands or on the table, no one would listen to it. So it's a good way of being in a position where you're giving advice and helping people, but the tool, the tool is now a prop. Like you say, it's part of the show. And when it becomes performative, again, I don't mind that. I don't mind a good old-fashioned, the voices have left me now, you must go, they have no more messages for you, and stuff like that. That can be very impactful and stuff. But it's good that the person can be free to be open and authentic and honest about what they're doing.
Yes.
And I don't think research or knowledge gets in the way of things, but I don't think it's necessary. People can do damn fine readings on from a palm in a pub. I've plenty of experience of people doing damn fine readings in very unusual circumstances and with no formal or academic knowledge or even knowledge of the history. They may even have misinformation, like the tarot cards come from ancient Egypt.
Right.
But they can still somehow do a good reading,
And there is like this feeling or this kind of tradition of, I know for one example, my grandmother lived on a small island, small community, and she would use playing cards. And what my aunts and uncles have said since then is, Yeah, she was doing readings, but she really just was kind of good at gossiping and was able to give people advice, and people would listen in that way, and she would be able to pull things.
Yeah,
But
I think was it in again, this isn't a sales ploy, it is a nice picture somewhere that we have here. Probably won't be able to find it now. There's a great picture from a magazine in the 30s or 50s, and it shows us where tarot was in those years, where a lot of our grandmothers would have learned it from the magazines and letters. So it's these sorts of adverts where it actually says this spellbinding 16-page supplement with the women's magazine will give you and your friends hours of fun. What shall we do now? And it's for a party.
Yes.
Basically, it's like a parlor game to entertain your friends, particularly in a female-only space. And that's 1934 and that's 1952.
Kind of like a fun little parlor trick at that point, really.
But that's where tarot survived. That is where tarot survived. The occultists had it in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. They, after the war, occultism mutated entirely, both in America and the UK, and moved towards spiritualism and theosophy and things like this. But sorry?
I love theosophy as far as like what is it, Helena
Blavatsky?
I love her. She's one of the people I read so much of.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about Blavatsky because when I did the MA in Western Esotericism, it was funded at Exeter University by the Theosophical Society.
Interesting.
And as a result, we had not one big module on theosophy, we had two. So it's like half of one of the years was having to study Blavatsky at
that's too much.
An academic level, but without the air quotes, at an academic level. And it absolutely broke my brain. I was trying to write essays and doing research from first-hand materials by Blavatsky on all sorts of what I just considered nonsense, not in theosophy, but like the gossip side of it, like this person had said this about another person and about their secret master, but their secret master had not said the thing that the other person had not said, that the other person had said, but had reported it in a letter that was... And I spent 6 months of my life trying to write master's level academic papers on that sort of thing. So I love Blavatsky to death, don't get me wrong, but it still makes me shudder to this day because it just almost broke my spirit. 12 of us started that course and only 2 of us finished, and only 1 of us was at the conferment ceremony, and that was this idiot.
God bless. Congratulations, though. You made it through.
But it was the theosophy that almost the theosophy was where it sorted out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
Well, a skill in all of this is to take what you can rationalize and leave what you can't, because I'll say another person I really love is Edgar Cayce, and sometimes I have to be like, okay, Edgar, the Akashic records and Atlanta, that's good food for thought, but the proof and the real medical things and the actual things that we could prove are really much more of what I'm drawn towards. At a certain point, you never know. You have to kind of, like I said, you have to take what sticks and what makes sense and leave certain things.
Again, it's the greatest of secrets passing through the most unlikely of hands. So there's certainly, like Swedenborg and Eliphas Levi, everyone is dated to their time when we work with the material information and resources that we have. So and again, it's important for us to my occult teacher, my second occult teacher, said to me, there is an occult tradition. There's a real hidden sort of secret occult tradition. And the first tradition of any tradition in occultism is that you make up the tradition.
Yes. Yes.
So you make your what's it in superhero terms, your origin story, and that is a tradition. It is a tradition to say your teaching is from Atlantis, or your teaching has to be from somewhere other than you. So part of the tradition is having that narrative, and the same with the tarot. No matter how much we tell people or write books on, it's a card game, and but like you're saying, and this is why your interviews are so cool, because you're getting at the stories of the people, and they're always far more interesting than the made up stories.
Yep.
And particularly when you then disprove the made up stories, but the true stories, the real stories, are actually really interesting. And it's the same with Waite, and it's the same with Pamela Coleman Smith. Even Edwin Steinbrück, I spoke to his nephew briefly, and his story, his personal life story, was really, really interesting. It would make a good book or a good film. We still wonder why no one's done a Pamela Coleman Smith, Arthur Edward Waite, Origins of the Tarot film.
That would be a great one.
Yeah, Tolly and I keep saying we've got to spend some time writing a screenplay and touting it.
A stage production, even just to pay homage,
Yeah, for sure. I want someone like Olivia Colman to play Pamela Coleman Smith, I think. Anyhow, there might be problematic issues with some of their life story, even their own life story. Pamela Coleman Smith used to appropriate Jamaican culture, and she wasn't Jamaican herself, but she made a living by retelling Jamaican stories dressed as a Jamaican.
Oh no! Yes.
I know we now have this idea that she was, perhaps a feminist, and she did design posters for feminist movements at the time, but she was reasonably from a well-off background. She traveled a lot, and she appropriated a culture other than her own for entertainment to make money, and that's and she was a Catholic. So
that's always so messy, is trying not to appropriate, but also trying to draw from every culture or learn every culture, and it really is something that I don't know. It's a tough one to kind of put by the wayside all of these other things that could inform you.
And these days, I think we're far better off, in the sense of we are far more mindful and contemplative and aware of it. And that's, even if we still make mistakes from day to day or week to week, I studied Kabbalah. I've studied Kabbalah my whole life, but I'm not Jewish.
Right.
So I state that I approach Kabbalah from a Western esoteric point of view, but I'm aware of the Jewish traditions. I've met Jewish scholars, Jewish authors, and I've gone to the time for my own passion and interest to meet with people who are informed from there. But yeah, it's how open and authentic are we to what we're inspired by, where we get the information, and how we share it as well, and how we teach it, and what our motivation is for doing that. So I think it's important, again, that people do feel open to explore, and that they don't think that there's a set way that they have to find. I know it's a cliche, but you end up finding yourself in the end. So that's all you can find, I think.
You've got to help yourself before you help others, right? Is kind of absolutely. One quick story I'll say on the topic of kind of making things up for the betterment of people in the moment. There's an interesting story of a World War II, a Holocaust survivor. And she was a little girl when she got to the camp, and there was a Romani woman, a gypsy kind of woman, and she looked at her palm, and she told her she had the line of a survivor, and she swore. She was like, I don't know why. for that moment, she says that in her older age, she really thinks she was just making it up. And the woman ended up dying right next to her like that night. But she says that woman saying that to her as a little girl gave her the wherewithal to get through it. And sometimes if it takes that, then God bless those people who are able to kind of pull things from thin air or know what someone needs to hear, even if it's not the academic side. But
yeah, perhaps as we close off, I can share one story.
absolutely.
I was at a car boot sale again when our family at the time had very little money. So I was doing like a car boot sale, garage sale sort of thing. It was an old cheap trading market. So we had the stalls. We were literally in the sheep stalls with our little booths and so on. And I would turn up in the morning and I would charge like, £2.50, like $3, $4 for a reading. And I would have my cards and I would lay out cards and do readings. And some days I'd do like 30 or 40 readings, one after another all day. And just for anyone watching who does too many readings, wash your hands in water for quite a while afterwards to get the energy off them.
Yeah.
Because it builds up. I don't know if it's just static, but it does build up. So just do that on occasion. And I'd go home at night and I'd pour out all of the coins and stuff onto the table. And that was our food money for the next week. That would determine how much we could eat. And I was doing a reading for someone. This girl sat down. She was possibly 19, 20 in that area. She sat down. I laid out the cards. And my wife at the time was walking by me and she reads tarot. And I heard her literally gasp behind me. She went like that and carried on walking. And as soon as I got home that night and we met up again, she said, "What the hell was that reading?"
Oh, like she heard it.
No, she saw the cards on the table.
Oh.
And she gasped. And I still I remember every single card from that reading, and I still use it in a exercise to show people a bad reading.
Right.
Because it was like literally like Ten of Swords, Death, Blasted Tower, all of the bad cards. I know these days we don't have bad cards. We just have, cards we have to respond to and adjust to, opportunity cards. But I assure you, and I was doing the reading and I kept saying to this person, well, we've got the death card there, but that's really about transformation. And I think you, no, hang on a second. No, you've got the Blasted Tower there. And yeah, that should be in the position of where you've got hope. And I can't see any.
Yes.
And I remembered in that moment, and this is why I still teach it to this very day, because it comes from real experience, is always read the cards.
Yep.
Always read the cards. So I lent into that and I said, and this card here is really negative. Your past is negative. You've got no hope in the future. It's like, it's a dead end. And the card above, that's where your highest aspirations is, but that's reversed. And it's like, that's got nowhere for you to go.
Yeah.
And I did the whole reading like that. Now, it was weird. And as she got up at the end of the reading, I said, I've tried to be honest and authentic with you. I've tried to read the cards, and I'm really sorry. Usually I try and find some agency, some positive thing for you
Some advice, right? Yeah.
And she looked at me and she could see I was actually genuinely concerned and worried about my reading. And she looked at me and said, well, if it's any help to you, I don't think I am going to kill myself tonight.
Oh, man, yes.
And she walked off. And for weeks afterwards, I thought, what was in the reading that changed her mind? And then I realized that there was nothing in the reading that had changed her mind. The fact is that by doing the reading and it accurately reporting her state meant that there is more to life than just this.
That's the validation. That's what I find that my clients start crying when they realize.
And so then, and to this day, that's why I say incorporate and utilize and read the cards. We are only tarot card readers. That is all we need to do. And in doing so, we demonstrate the invisible knots that bind the universe.
Right.
And that is enough to give meaning. It is enough to give hope. It is enough to give validation. Great word. It is enough to give confirmation. It is enough to change someone's state and so forth. And all we need to do is dead easy. We just read the cards.
Yes.
And trust to the fact that the universe is bound by invisible knots, so we can find meaning, validation, value, self-worth, all sorts of things. They're all in there.
Well, tarot, more than any other practice, is all about chance, where things fall. It's like the Dadaist movement in art and modern art is nothing is by accident. And once you see that, once you show someone that, the implications are so much bigger than everything else. And astrology, different things that you can see tangibly, they don't have that same result.
We have a phrase for it in Tarosophy, which is there is no such thing as an accidental oracle.
Yes, absolutely. So, wow, that was a really powerful story to leave off on. Thank you. Genuinely, thank you for sharing that. So for anyone listening, for anyone watching, how can they support you? Where can they find your books? Where can they get courses? Things like that.
Okay, so our main port of call is the Tarosophy Tarot Association. That is www.tarotassociation.net, N-E-T. Someone has cyber squatted the .com domain, and we cannot yet afford it. One day we will buy that domain off some anonymous third person who's just bought the domain. But tarotassociation.net. My site is marcuskatz.net. That's where my esoteric teachings are. We have a magical order. We have a magical group where we work quite a lot with each other. It's only a small group of people. So those are the first two ports of call. We've got a very busy Instagram channel that we're doing a post every day. We're now down to every 2 days because we're finishing some book projects, and that's at Tarot Association.
It's a very interesting Instagram for anyone who wants to follow that. The art, the combinations of cards, it's got kind of like a little bit of a sassy vibe here and there, but also like a deeper meaning kind of thing. Yes, I've enjoyed following that one for sure.
And I should point out actually that I've been working last year on the actual Magicians Bookshelf channel on YouTube. I've only been doing it a year, so it still feels quite new to me, but I'm developing that. I'm doing a video every week, and we have a load of shorts where I've shared my entire library every day, a book. So there's about 300 or 400 of my top recommended books about Crowley, about H.P. Lovecraft, about alchemy, tarot, astrology.
You have to give that a follow. That sounds really cool.
And that's all, of course, free, other than if you're watching the YouTube adverts. I make about 10 cents every 3 months or something from that. So, yay! We eat again. Rich beyond our wildest dreams. So there's a YouTube channel as well, and I am putting a lot of work into that at the moment.
Yep. It's not the most rewarding thing, but it's a very fun kind of, I guess the emotional reward is the reward, right?
And that's why you have to do these things often. It's just because we want to. I used to say about teaching people Western esotericism, I only will teach or discuss, develop with people that would be doing it anyway, even if people were trying to stop them doing it. That's the only thing that will get you on with any sort of spiritual or mystical work, any of the deeper work at least, is that celator nature of having the zeal to do it and persevering. I mean, again, just to round things off, that rejection letter I didn't write for 30 years, and now that's my job. So you just have to persevere. Sometimes it's just not the time to be doing what you want to do. So you have to do what you are being given to do. And that's where we find our calling, in doing what we are given to do.
I love that. That's a great piece of advice to end off on. Yeah.